Señor Presidente, Monsieur le Président du Conseil européen, Mesdames et Messieurs les députés.
President of Parliament, members of Parliament, it is exactly 5 years to the day when your Parliament voted to put its trust in my Commission, and you have always stood by us. It is true at times we have had difficult relations, but they have always been polite, at times difficult but courteous. So I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for having had the support of this chamber, the elected members of the European Parliament. You reflect European democracy, and it is a real honour. I see a lot of faces that I know well here, people who have become friends across the institutions and friends for life as well. So I would really like to thank all of you, and I would like to thank President Tusk as well. We were like twins, brothers, but even amongst brothers there can be disagreements, but we were able to overcome these disagreements. I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to you that we didn't always agree on everything, but I would like to thank Donald for his unwavering support. He is a friend. We often use this word lightly in politics, but actually these friendships, even within the same political family, can be quite rare. But without Donald, I would not have been able to achieve what I have. As I'm speaking for the last time in this Parliament, I would also like to send my very best wishes to Mrs. von der Leyen. She is the right person to be leading this Commission. I think she needs all our encouragement and support, so I wish her all the best. I would also like to thank my commissioners. Without them, I would not have been able to achieve anything at all. These are men and women who individually and collectively have done their best for Europe, so thank you for all of them.
Lorsque j'ai pris mes fonctions,
when I took office in 2014, Europe was in a fragile state. Solidarity had been fractured. Europe in 2014 was not well loved, which is why we talked about a last chance commission. But really, it was a commission that was there to help a Europe that had broken down to some extent. It was a really decisive moment in 2014 when it came to the future of Europe. We were all responsible for trying to give a new impetus to Europe. I chose, together with my colleagues, to put in place a political commission. I wanted the commissioners to be elected. I had two British commissioners, in fact, but all of them were elected, whether that had been on a national level or a European level. I wanted them to be people who were well known in their countries. I didn't want them to simply be shut away in Europe, hidden away in the Berlaymont. I wanted them to get out, to talk to people, to talk to other officials, to engage with public opinion, with the citizens. Over the last 5 years, we had around 1,800 of these citizen dialogues, and the commissioners visited national parliaments 911 times, including regional parliaments. At the beginning of my mandate, I had promised you that the Commission would focus on what was essential, to be big on big. We wanted to end the increasing number of legislative initiatives which was impeding the action of the Commission. We had 84% less legislative initiatives based on the previous initiatives. We withdrew 142 legislative proposals and modernised 162 existing pieces of legislation. We did everything we could to keep our promises, but of course there were nevertheless the usual blame placed on the Commission, and we know that that is something that persists in Europe. Even though things have changed, people act as if nothing had changed. When I first stood before you, I had 3 key words which I wanted to guide the work of the Commission: growth, jobs and investment. We have the 25th trimester of growth consecutively in Europe. We have created 14 million jobs. Unemployment is at its lowest since 2000. And 241 million Europeans are in work. The Juncker plan has helped to generate 432 billion euros of investment. At the beginning, people thought this plan would fail, that it would simply remain empty words on paper. And then it was the Juncker plan. Now it's the European Strategic Fund for Investment. So it had a name change since it became successful. That's how it will be known. 1 million jobs were created thanks to this investment plan. We have helped to strengthen the Stability and Growth Pact as well by adding increased flexibility to some of these provisions. This was against the will of many, against certain member states that had never formally adopted this flexibility that we used to help enrich this pact. But you can see the results: deficit from 6.6% to 0.7%. So this flexibility is sensible and well thought out and very positive for the Stability and Growth Pact, and that helped us to respond when Spain, Portugal, Italy and Greece needed adjustments to be made in their favour. During my mandate, I have encountered disappointments. Despite our best efforts, we were not able to achieve success with the Cypriot reunification. We were not able to conclude a treaty with Switzerland, despite our best and numerous efforts. We did not manage to put in place the banking union. I don't think that's due to any lack of proposals on the Commission's side, but there was a lack of response from the Member States' side. If we do not fully implement the banking union, we will not have a proper economic and monetary union. The banking union is an essential part of that, and if we don't have that, we won't be able to respond to future shocks, whether they are internal or external. So that is something that needs to be done. There is an obligation to put in place a deposit guarantee system. If we do not have that, or our banking union, and if we don't have our banking union, there isn't a proper economic and monetary union. We need to be able to react to the challenges ahead. Over the last 5 years, despite the crises we encountered, there were things we managed to achieve. I don't want to say successes necessarily. I want to remain humble here. But there are things that we managed to get done. Let me talk about the social aspects of the Union, first of all. This has not been the most popular aspect over the last few decades, but we have adopted a pillar on social rights. When I spoke for the first time in front of this Parliament as Employment Minister for Luxembourg, I was already talking about these issues. Before we put in place the pillar of social rights, we brought up the Posted Workers Directive again. Despite expectations, we managed to get an agreement between Parliament and Council. I think this could be described as a success of this Commission. For the same job, the same work, you should have the same salary. What we were talking about there was the dignity of our workers. It is hard to have a prosperous Europe if we forget those who are working for Europe's future. Another success, I think, is that of Greece. I mention this because it's something that caused me a lot of concern. I think we gave Greece back its dignity that it deserved. I think we had for too long trampled on the dignity of the Greek people, so I wanted to give these people back their due, all the respect that they were due. We wanted as a Commission to act in favour of Greece. I remember being up for long nights with the Samaras-Tsipras government, the Mitsotakis government, although he was obviously not there at the time. We tried as best we could to resolve the Greek problem. There were many governments who did not want the Commission to be involved. I remember phone calls from a number of prime ministers who said, stick to things that are under your remit. It's up to the member states to deal with the Greek problem. I, perhaps somewhat naively, thought that we should respect the treaty. The treaty clearly states that the Commission is in charge of the general interest of Europe, and I believe it was in the general interest to avoid the Eurozone falling apart, and I think we were right to do what we did. I think we as Europeans cannot forget our neighbours. We cannot forget Africa. This is a continent that needs our solidarity, but not our charity necessarily. This is an old reflex that we have as Europeans, but what we're looking at today is putting in place an equal partnership between Europe and Africa. We want to invest in Africa. We want to create jobs. That should be the focus of what we are doing. We should not simply view Africa in the light of the refugee crisis. That would be to dishonour the continent if we were simply to think of refugees. We need to do what we can to stop people drowning in our oceans. Refugees, a success or not? I think the overall outcome is better than we could have hoped, but it certainly could be better still. If Council as Parliament tried to follow the proposals that we put before them, We put forward a proposal on relocalisation in March 2014 and then March 2016 on the reform of the Dublin system. Let's not forget that thanks to Europe, so we were able to save 760,000 people that might have drowned otherwise in the Mediterranean. That was thanks to Europe. Is that the only survivor there who's clapping? I said in March 2014 what we were going to do for refugees, and Parliament gave me a standing ovation. I said, well, you're clapping, but are you sure you will still be clapping in 2 years' time? And they certainly were less as time went on. In a lot of countries, the interior policy did not necessarily follow the principle of solidarity that we should be sticking to. I did not think when I first became head of the Commission that I would deal with international trade so much. It's a very difficult, controversial subject in all of our countries. There are often good arguments that people make against trade agreements that are done too quickly. Well, we managed to conclude 15 international trade agreements. We have agreements now with 60 countries, and that makes up 40% of our overall wealth. These trade agreements allow us to be present on the world stage at a time when the US is turning its back on multilateralism and organised solidarity with other countries. We also need to talk about Europe's role in the world. I think the biggest European success, the biggest contribution it makes, is that we were able to maintain peace in Europe. It might sound self-evident, but it is not. Today, as I'm speaking, there are 60 wars around the world, but there is no conflict whatsoever on European territory, when in fact we had some of the bloodiest wars over the last 100 years. So peace is not something that should be considered self-evident, and we should be proud of that.
Nun ist mir bewusst,
I am aware that young people are not quite so enthusiastic or motivated by this achievement. But I think it is very important that we talk to young people, that we engage them in this eternal dilemma between peace and war. If you look at the direct neighbours of the European Union, you can see how dangerous the situation can be and how fragile the situation of the European Union is. It's important we talk to young people about war and peace. In 20 years, there won't be any Europeans left, grandparents, great-grandparents, who will remember this. So it's very important that we talk about this, otherwise it will be forgotten. So I think it's always important to talk to young people about war and peace. But that's not enough as a justification. You need to also give young people a future, a perspective. What is the future of Europe? We are the smallest continent. A lot of Europeans don't really appreciate that. We are very small as a continent. Politics brings together geography and demographics. There isn't any policy that doesn't encompass those aspects. We are slowly dying out. We are becoming less and less. At the beginning of the century we were so many more, but by the end we will only be 4% of the population. So we need to think about what we can do to boost our potential. We will see a change in the makeup of the G7, of the economic powers around the world. So now the moment has come to look at the perspective. Europe means peace, Europe means strength, because we have less and less influence in the world. I think we need to bear that in mind when we think about foreign policy as well. Think about how we can be influential in decision making. I think we need to have a qualified majority voting for foreign policy in Council. Maybe not on every single issue, but it is important. And we want Europe to be a leader. We had an interesting event in Washington in July of last year with President Trump. And there we were able to avoid a tariff war. Now, how did we manage to achieve that? Trump gave a long speech, as is his way. He talked about the different leaders in Europe, the chancellors, the prime ministers, and he said he had spoken to them, and I said that's not enough, because actually it's the Commission that is solely responsible for international trade. The President of the Commission speaks on behalf of the European Union, and I think that really made an impression. It was really quite unprecedented, I think, to have that show of strength. So, conclusions. I would say we have to have moderation in our conclusions, not overjoyed, but not too terribly disappointed either. I think we have tried very hard, and I think if everyone were to try equally hard, things would be better. I am proud that over the last 5 years that I've been a small part of something much bigger, something that's more important than any of us. I think you need to continue to fight for Europe and fight against stupid nationalisms. Long live Europe.